Welcome back to Torah on the Go. If you are walking your dog or on the Peloton or just taking a break from work, we are awfully glad that you are joining us for this episode. This is the pinnacle of the season of Torah on the Go because we're finally reaching the revelation at Sinai. We're going to talk about the Ten Commandments. Built up for weeks and weeks of episodes, we have built up to this moment where God speaks Anochi to Moses, the Jewish people, and of course to all the generations. Right. All right. We begin with, "I am the Lord your God." And there is much midrash, much story about the idea that people heard. All of it, people heard some of it. People heard just the first letter, which of course is silent, part of the brilliance. We'll talk about the Ten Commandments all throughout this episode. And I'm going to kick it over to my friend and my podcasting partner, Rabbi Feinstein.
Well, this is such an interesting, let's take a look at the bigger structure here, right? God comes into the world, takes this people out of Egypt, brings them to the holy mountain in the desert, and opens a covenant with them. And you know, you could imagine that the next chapter, which is the chapter after the Epiphany of chapter 19, you could imagine that that chapter would tell us what they saw, what they felt, what it means to be in the presence of God. But right away, the very next word is a commandment. That the Jewish faith has this idea that the ultimate expression of connection between heaven and earth is law, rules, and some prosaic rules. Again, some of them are lofty. Honor your father and mother. Keep the Shabbat, right? And then you get some really prosaic rules. Don't commit adultery, right? I mean, it's a prosaic rule in the sense that it deals with the lowest part of the human being. And so this whole idea that our covenant with God is expressed in rules, because this was, of course, the thing that drove Paul crazy and created Christianity, because he wanted to do away with all of these rules. He wanted simply an opening of the soul to divinity. That's the essence of early Christianity. But we maintained then in the Bible, we maintained in the rabbinic era opposite Christianity, and even today, that our closeness to God is expressed in rules. And that's what you and I were trained in when we were trained as rabbis. You want to know what a rabbi really is a person who's authorized to make legal decisions within the Jewish people. It's kosher, it's not kosher. It's permitted, it's not permitted. We do this, we do that. The idea that law, and now law is such an interesting thing because law is based on a paradox. Law is, because you need the law, because you're not perfect, you need the law. The law is a corrective. It is a curriculum, a pedagogic tool to turn you into a better, more exalted human being. But you can keep the law. Law has implicit within it the basic rule of ethics, which is ought implies can. So you need the law because you're not perfect, but you can observe the law because you're perfectible. And that's what law is for the Jewish people. It's an image of what we as people, what we as a world can become. That's the great gift of law in Jewish life.
So I'm going to run through the actual Ten Commandments here because I feel like most often in Jewish life we talk about the significance of the commandments, the meaning behind the commandments. We don't actually talk about the commandments themselves. And yet then most Jewish people come to synagogue, they sit in on most ark doors around the country, not on ark doors on our VBS.
Well, yeah, actually, those little designs.
We have little designs, but it doesn't. On some, they actually say the first word of each.
No, because everybody at VBS knows them by heart. So all we needed were designs. We didn't need the words.
Well, in Chicago at Bethel, they didn't know them by heart because we had them up on the ark doors when they were closed. So the Ten Commandments, of course, is Anochi, I am the Lord your God. Lo yiyeh, there shall not be any other gods besides me. Lo tisah, do not take the Lord's name in vain. 4 is zachor, which is, remember the Sabbath day. 5 is kabed, honor your mother and your father. 6, lo tirtzach, do not murder. 7 is lo tinaf, do not commit adultery. 8 is lo tignov, do not steal. 9 is lo ta'aneh, do not bear false witness. And 10 is lo tachmod, do not covet. Okay, we have 5 positives and 5 negatives.
Right.
And we don't know what the other 5 is that Mel Brooks dropped, right? So we have these 10 is what we're left with. If you can appreciate History of the World Part 1, that was one of the sketches. Okay, so we have 5 positives that are very conceptual and lofty, like you just said. And then we have 5 negative commandments that start out, thou shalt not or don't, however you want to understand it. And it's negative commandments is how the rabbis understand it. Why do you think the balancing act between positivity, negativity, loftiness?
Well, there's all kinds of ways of structuring these, right? So 5 positive, 5 negative. You also have 5 which are ben adam lemakom, between us and God, right? I am the Lord your God. Don't have other gods. Don't take God's name in vain. Keep my Shabbos. And kibud avaim, honor your mother and father, because they are effectively God's agents in the world. And then 5 which are between human beings, which is social.
And those are all negative.
Those are all negative. Murdering, adultery, stealing, false witness. That's another way to structure them, right? Or then you could or else, if you're really clever, you could read them across.
Right. So Kabbalistically in the Zohar and Jewish mysticism, it's read across. So it's read, I am the Lord your God, and therefore all human beings are created in my image, so do not murder.
Exactly.
1 runs into 6, 2 runs into 7, 3 runs into 8, so you can read them across if you understand them on 2 tablets like that.
Right. And as we said a couple of months ago, when we were talking about this, one of the most beautiful Kabbalistic readings is if you take the 10 words of creation, God creates the world with 10 let there be's, and 10 plagues in Egypt are the undoing of creation. And then the 10 commandments are the tools God gives us to redo creation, to put the world back into order, having seen what we did to the world. So these are tools for tikkun. These are tools for fixing the world. There are all these wonderful ways of putting it together. Interestingly, though, I think you alluded to this. It's not just that it's on the Ark door. We used to say the 10 commandments as part of the Shema. In other words, whenever we would pledge allegiance to God, Shema Yisrael, we would recite the 10 commandments. The rabbis took it out of that because they were objecting to the Christian community's overemphasis on the 10 commandments. The Christian community said all the other commandments are abrogated except these 10. The rabbis didn't want anyone to have that impression, so they took the 10 commandments out of the Shema. Maybe it's time to put them back in again. Maybe it's time to put something legal and normative back into the confession of Jewish faith, because it's an important statement that it's not enough simply to say, I believe. You have to live it out. And these 10 are the foundations of all ethics. They're foundation of Jewish ethics, of social ethics, and the foundation of religious ethics.
So Rambam, Maimonides, was a big believer in the reading of lists during services.
Right.
So he believed that we should read the 10 Commandments. He also believed that we should recite the 13 principles of faith every service. He believed that we should be reading lots and lots of lists.
That's why the presidents of our synagogues read those long lists of events coming in the shul, because they're all Maimonidean. Don't you understand?
That's right. We have a bunch of Maimonidean presidents.
They're wonderful people.
Yeah. You're right. We have gone away from the reading of lists in order to create something more, I would argue, inspiring.
Right.
In modernity, we're not just telling Jews, this is how you have to be Jewish. We're trying to inspire people to be Jewish because we all understand that there's a choice. There's a choice. We all wake up every morning with a choice. Even us that were fortunate enough to be born Jewish, we find ourselves every morning making a choice. Just like fortunate enough I am to be married to my wife, every morning we each wake up and we decide to be married again another day, even though we were involved in this covenant ceremony. Right. This is a covenantal ceremony between God and the Jewish people, and perhaps the beginning of a covenantal ceremony that ends up affecting most of the Western world, Western civilization. This ceremony's significance is everlasting. These rules, these 10 rules, these 10 in the Torah, in the Hebrew, Aser HaDibrot, 10 statements, these 10 sentences, they affect the way in which we live out, play out civilization from that point forward. And I don't know that do not bear false witness would necessarily have been on my list. I think about, every year in Hebrew school or in the day school, teachers begin the year by saying, let's all create a brit.
Yes, right.
Let's all create a brie. We're going to write these things on a piece of construction paper, and then we're going to tape it up on the wall for the whole year, right?
It's even better in the ECC, in the early childhood.
Yeah.
You ask a bunch of 4-year-olds to give us your 10 commandments, and it's things like share the trucks.
That's right. Share the trucks. Right. That's exactly right.
Thou shalt share the blocks.
That's right. Thou shalt share the blocks. Thou shalt not hit each other.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Thou shalt raise your hand and wait your turn. Right. Honor the process of raising your hand and waiting your turn.
Right.
So you see, you and I have the same experience. We walk in these classrooms all the time, and we see these pieces of construction paper with all this list.
They're wonderful.
They're wonderful. And the kids create these rules in the best version of themselves on the first day when they're trying to make the best impression. And then they violate the rules from time to time.
Yeah, we all do.
We all do.
Right.
We all do. And so even something as parochial, as human, as do not bear false witness, we can't always live up to the rule.
We try.
We try.
Right.
We try. So the 10 statements are in some ways, even the ones that we think are not so lofty, end up being lofty for us in moments of our life. In moments of our life. And we all face these kinds of challenges, whether it be individually or communally or societally, socially, we all butt up against these ideas at one time or another. And I always think about those children in the first list. You shall share your trucks.
Yeah.
It's easy on the first day before you fall in love with the trucks. And then it becomes a little bit more complicated.
But what's so wonderful, you said it so nicely. What it's so wonderful is that even a 4-year-old kid gets it, that in order to share this space, look, there's 18 of us in this room plus 2.5 teachers, 3 teachers. In order to share this space, we have to establish some rules. And that even though we're the ones who put the rules up on the wall, those rules now rule us. I mean, the dynamic of rules as a element, as a foundation of any social organization. That's what these 10 commandments are. You can't have a society unless you have certain fundamental understandings of how we walk a common space. How we walk a common space. I think that what's important, one of the exercises we always do with Hebrew school kids, which I find very, very moving, is to tell the kids, now translate all the negative ones into positive ones. So, lo tirtzach, don't murder. And a kid will raise his hand and say, respect life, love life. I say, now, why do you suppose this is lo tirtzach? He says, because loving life is hard to do as an abstraction, but I cannot murder today. All right, but loving life, lo tinaf, keep your promise. Keep intimacy where it belongs. Keep your promise to be intimate and faithful. Build trust among us. Lo tignov. Respect each other's things, our material being in the world. I think these are kind of wonderful. When you ask Hebrew school kids to translate negatives into positive, negative commandments into positive commandments, into values, you end up with a kind of a profound list.
All right, because this is an exercise that I was preparing when I was preparing for this episode. I like issuing new commandments. I did it on Rosh Hashanah, the 615th commandment. Now we're going to come up with the 11th of the Aseret HaDibrot.
Pray for the Cubs.
Pray for the Cubs. Might be even beyond the Kadosh Baruch Hu. I thought today, if we put our minds together and thought, what would be a commandment that we need today in this world? I thought to myself, civil discourse.
Listen to each other. Shema Yisrael.
Listen to each other.
Listen to each other.
Now, do you have another idea? What would be an idea that we'd want to add on to the 10 Commandments? If it wasn't civil discourse, is it human rights? Is it borders? Is it what are we supposed to be mindful of that the 10 Commandments doesn't point us to? But now in modernity, in this moment, we realize, you shall not put your cell phone on the table during dinner. What is the commandment that you see?
I asked kids this question. So I had a wonderful conversation with a group of kids, and a couple of the kids said, respect the planet. It's my job it is our commandment to protect the planet, because the planet's the only one we got. I thought that was a kind of a profound one. I like that one. I think that, protecting each other's humanity, which I think is an extension of lo tirtzach. It's actually an extension of all of them, frankly. That, to really see the divinity within each other and to behave that way, to really behave that way.
I mean, that's a recognition that we're all created in the image of God, that we all carry with us a spark of the divine. We should all be treated with a certain amount of dignity. That should be a baseline understanding, perhaps even before you get to 1.
Yeah,
That's part of the preamble.
Get your ego out of the way.
Right.
I mean, and we see this, the simplest kind of thing. I was standing at the supermarket. There's a woman with a cart full of stuff behind me and children everywhere, right? And I only have a few. I said, go ahead of me. And she said, no. I said, please go ahead of me. I can get myself out of the way because this lady needs to get out of the market quicker than I do. A small, tiny act of, I'm not the center of the universe. Right. Let someone else take the seat. Let someone else have the space. Let me onto the freeway, damn it, when I'm trying to get on, this kind of just get yourself out of the way, I think, is sort of a commandment that I'd love to see people observe.
I think, though, that that's a perfect example of the relationship between rules and manners.
Yeah. Okay.
Meaning to say,
that's a good distinction.
When we were growing up, there was a rule that if you saw, just to pick an example, a pregnant woman come onto public transportation, stand up. That's it. You stand up. Right. Now, over a while of practicing that rule, you learn the value of what that rule is trying to teach you.
Right, or an older person.
An older person, right.
Takum, you stand up in front of.
That's right. That's right. And so there is a relationship between rules and manners and the values and how you develop those over time. And I think that God here is playing the preschool teacher. It's just that the stakes are much higher than those trucks. Right. But it's always the trucks. We never leave that preschool class.
Yeah.
Just we're always those children in God's eyes. God's always trying to regulate, to teach us the lesson the best that God can.
Right. Because Maimonides points out that character starts as behavior.
Right.
It's a habit. Character is a habit. Generosity is a habit. Openness is a habit. So you have this, practice these as habits, practice these as manners, and slowly you become that kind of person.
That's right.
You become that kind of person. Rabbi Schulweis, my teacher, used to have a marvelous drasha that he gave on this parsha. He used to say, the difference between a chassid and a misnagid is that the misnagid is a rational Jew, says, you will not lie. And the chassid says, yes, you will not lie to yourself. And so he would take the 10 Commandments, starting with the end, the 5 at the end, and he would add that phrase to each one. So that instead of just reading it as thou shalt not murder, lo tirtzach, you will not murder yourself. He asks, what are all the ways in which we murder ourselves? All the ways we destroy ourselves. You will not commit adultery. You will not commit adultery against yourself. You will not prostitute yourself. Then they become really very interesting commandments, very modern commandments of that. You will not steal from yourself. You will not commit false witness against yourself. I mean, it's a very interesting way of constructing the 10 Commandments at that point, in that way.
Right.
That was his drasha.
Beautiful.
Fascinating way of thinking about what the commandments are for.
Right. It's beautiful. And what's fascinating is that Moses then comes down the mountain. We're in chapter 20 of Exodus. He's on the mountain. He receives the 10 Commandments. And then he has many more conversations with God. But we don't share them in the same way ever again as a community.
Yeah.
This is if a screenwriter were to write this movie, and we know that it came out in the movie The 10 Commandments, this is the end of the movie. This is the climax of the movie.
Right.
And the Torah goes on. This is 1.5 books into the 5 books of Moses. The Torah goes on for another 2.5 books after this.
Because the challenge
is 3.5 books. Excuse me.
Because the challenge isn't just to receive them. The challenge is actually to receive them,
right.
To really do them, to make them part of yourself. And that runs up against every impulse of human beings, our lowest impulses, How do you live this stuff out?
Right. I will always think to myself, this happened to Moses when he was 80 years old. He lives to 120. Right? At the end of the Torah, at his death, he's 120. So this is one of these moments for Moses where I feel like we can only talk to Moses and Paul McCartney about this type of idea, right? That for the next 40 years, that every meeting start for Moses where people would say to him, can you tell me what it was like at the top of the, just tell me what exactly you saw, whatever it is. Every meeting, every interview that Paul McCartney has is about the same 9 years of his life that occurred decades earlier in his life, right?
true, yeah.
And so here Moses, he goes on for another 40 years after this.
Right.
After this moment, that this is the moment in his life that changes the world.
God must love old guys. I'm telling you, there's hope for us.
There's hope for us.
Us gray hairs.
There's hope for all of us. Maybe that's a good way to end this. Is that you start with the 10 Commandments, and there's hope for all of us. Maybe that's what they're trying to say. I want to thank you for spending time with us today, and I hope, for all of our sake, that you come back next week and learn a little bit more with Rabbi Feinstein and me.
How are the Cubs doing?
We'll give you a live update at a different time. Come to services, and I'll give you an update every week. I look forward to seeing you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.